Hey everyone, Noble Comics here. Something I've been thinking about over the past few days, I guess. I guess I've been thinking about it for a lot longer than that, but especially over the past few days, is this central question of what is good writing? Or, more essentially, what makes writing good versus bad? Now, when we talk about good writing, obviously, some examples come to mind, Breaking Bad, or The Dark Knight Returns, To Kill a Mockingbird, movies, TV shows, comics, whatever it is that are just universally good. Saving Private Ryan, good. But what sets these apart as good writing versus bad writing? And does good writing make a good story? I'm not so sure all the time. Now, it's easy to notice bad writing. You can say that movie had a really poor pacing, that character development was rushed. You could say they were inconsistent, yada yada yada, all day long. But when it comes to good writing and why was it good, well, I think it's a little bit harder to describe, a little bit harder to notice. I got a few things here pulled up that'll hopefully help answer the question. So, the first thing I want to talk about is building believable worlds and believable characters, which is done primarily, what I believe, through writing what you know, writing what you understand. And that doesn't necessarily mean I grew up in a small Texan town, so I can only write about small Texan towns. But it's writing within your understanding. And a big part of that, I think, is not writing what you don't understand. Knowing your limits. And so here you have Isaac Asimov, quote, "Those people who think they know everything are a great annoyance to those of us who do." And I think that plays on the similar idea that there are writers and people out there who think that they understand how everything works and they can write about anything they want. Have some, I don't know, take some 14-year-old kid who took his very first physics class, and now he thinks that he can write all the science fiction in the world when he doesn't understand anything else. Building on that, you see Star Trek, it's a sci-fi show, but there's so much more in it that the writer has to understand. Human interaction, it's different kinds of politics, different morals and philosophical beliefs. And playing on all of this, Socrates, I know that I know nothing. Wisest, he was the quote-unquote wisest man currently living at the time. He knew that he knew nothing. He knew the limits of his thoughts. And then one more, Henry David Thoreau. How vain it is to sit down to write when you have not stood up to live. So it's more on that same theme. To sit and write about all these things, I think especially for example, take like wartime movies and wartime shows and everything like that, or books. Many of those written by either actual vets, or just wartime historians, people who know it. And there's something else that comes with that. They're writing what they know. Like he says, to sit and write about all this stuff without actually having lived any of it. Obviously, for a fiction novel or a fiction movie, you can't live it, but those themes, writing what you know, the themes within there, you can live. You can live a life of bravery. You can live a life of courage and a life of making sacrifices, a life of making mistakes, and you can use all of that to write a believable story. But if you haven't had any of that, then your story's not going to be believable. And that's what makes a bad story. Though, like I said, bad writing does not necessarily mean a bad story, but the two definitely cross over a lot. But like I was saying about military stuff in particular, I think we see a consistent theme and something that I think good writing benefits from is realism, and that emotional realism. Because think of how many wartime movies are so well known and respected, and won tons and tons of awards, especially just World War II movies in general. You make a World War II movie, you're gonna win an Oscar. It doesn't matter you're gonna win something, because it's just such a prevalent story in society that people just don't forget, and people are always talking about and thinking about World War II. Huge, one of the most important things that happened, especially to modern society. And people know it's real. It shows all of the real struggles and real heartbreak and the real journey that the world went on. And there are people who lived it, and so you get that sort of emotional tie to that stuff that makes it good because it's believable. But that's something that nonfiction kind of has an advantage over. But to this wider genre of just storytelling, making a good story, that's definitely a good first step, knowing what you know, writing what you know, and not trying to BS it, basically. If I right now just tried to write a story about, I don't know, Japan in the first century, I don't know anything about it. I've done none of the history. I've not looked at it all, but if I try to write a story about it, it'd turn out bad, because obviously I don't know anything about it. There are people with certain strengths with that kind of thing. I'm not one of them. And then here we've got building on writing what you know and building a believable world. We're kind of no better example than, of course, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Obviously, he never had to go cast a ring into the fires of Mordor, and he never had to journey along with the hobbits to do all this stuff. But he was a historian, he was a linguist, and he understood these basic human human interactions, human emotions, and he was a Catholic. In Catholic religion, there's a big theme of good versus evil, heaven and hell, and that definitely played a part in Lord of the Rings, where we've got the good guys versus the bad guys. And it's no more clearly laid out in Lord of the Rings as the struggle of good and evil. Something that, surely as a boy growing up Catholic, he learned and has stuck with him and influenced his writing. Though if he tried to write a story based on Taoist beliefs or something like that, probably wouldn't have turned out as well. So next, I've got Crying Tom King here, because we're talking about writing what you know doesn't always work out, because Tom King always writes what he knows, because what he knows is soy beta men. He's a soy beta man, so that's what he writes. His Batman was a soy beta Batman who cried all the time and always needed Catwoman to bail him out, or Catwoman to, save his butt, motivate him, do all the work, and he was just crying Batman, a big loser, disgrace Batman. But then again, that's how Tom King writes every single one of his male characters, whether it's Adam Strange, Mr. Miracle, Batman. It's all the same character. Their characters are Tom King. It's a self-insert. But it's sad, So, writing what you know certainly has its limits. Because stories also, between being believable, because sure, a sad old man, that's believable. I'm looking at one right now. But there's more to it than that when you're storytelling. It's also got to be fun. The audience has to like it. The audience has to have fun with it. Or it needs to impact them in such a way. I guess not every... Saving Private Ryan does not have to be fun in the same way Batman has to be fun. And so there's no clear difference between consistent and inconsistent characters than when you look at Tom King's Batman versus James Tynion IV's Batman. So the characters existed for what, like 80 years? And he's definitely gone through changes, but there has been a consistent nature. Batman is tough. He's a badass. He never gives up. He's the peak of human performance, and he never quits, and he's super serious and dark all the time. That's who he is. So when you have Batman crying and, oh, he just wants to settle down and be a dad and all this other stuff, well, that's not Batman. That's certainly not the Batman that we've been reading for the past 30 years. James Tynion Batman, though, goes back to that. It goes back to that era that I guess I'd say real Batman fans are familiar with. So it's more than just writing what you know, but keeping a consistent character and keeping consistent rules, which we'll see as we move on. So we have here, this is Ray Bradbury. He says, "You must stay drunk on writing so reality cannot destroy you." And good quote. The way I take that is, whenever you're writing, whenever you are creating a world, creating a story, you can't be bogged down by reality. You're trying to be fun. You're trying to be an escape for people. And in this way, it's like you're deep diving into the world you've created. And when you're in that world, you can write accurately from that perspective, right? If you're trying to write Lord of the Rings from the perspective of 2021 instead of from the perspective of Lord of the Rings, it's a different story. It's a worse story. Not as believable, and definitely not as fun. So that idea of you cannot let reality destroy you. And that's a big issue today, especially in comics, is comic books for the last decade or so have definitely succumbed to reality. The really fun and crazy, wacky, zany stories, there's still a handful. There's not a ton. Most stories, especially from Marvel, seem to be influenced by modern day politics, leftist politics, to be particular. And they are not drunk on writing, they're drunk on Donald Trump, and they're drunk on, liberal ideas, and that is what's filling the pages instead of this fun world that, has been created, all these fun superhero characters. But with that in mind, with this idea of consistent characters and consistent worlds, because again, you're writing from the world, not writing from reality, I think we've got a few examples here. So, first we have Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, who I'd say most people consider him to be the best written character on the show, which is a very well-written show. And you look at his, he had a character arc from villain to hero. And you could say, well, that's not a consistent character, technically, because his morality is changing. So, technically, you could say not consistent. But that's not always what people mean when they say consistent character. They mean is the world logic that this character chooses is consistent. So, his choice is not based on, I'm just evil, I want to be an evil person. He wants to regain his honor because he wants to have this relationship with his father. But that changes because as he goes on, he realizes, no one can restore his honor but himself. His father isn't really much of a father. And he goes through all these emotional journeys and ends up on the other side of the spectrum as a hero. It's a natural growth of this character. No step seems out of place. It isn't like one day he's shooting fireballs at the Avatar and then the next day he's trying to make friends. It happens over 3 seasons, and it's a steady but natural growth, especially because he has someone there to help him along that journey. He doesn't just do it on his own, but he gets a little bit of help from his uncle. And then you have Rey from the Disney Star Wars trilogy, who is a consistent character, but not consistent world logic. So she makes the same types of decisions she always makes because she never makes a bad decision. Everything she does is perfect, and everything she does is right, and everybody claps, and everybody tells her how great she is, she's the greatest of all time. She just doesn't make any mistakes. That's consistent, never makes a mistake. But where the issue happens is consistency in world logic, which is just as important, because you look at her journey and the logic around the things she accomplishes, and you compare that to the Star Wars world as a whole. And, everybody said, I'm definitely not the first person to talk about, she mastered the Force really quickly, and lightsaber fighting really quickly, and she could just fly the Millennium Falcon without any training and all that stuff. And there's been different kinds of reactions. One's like, oh, you just hate women. And the other one will be like, the kind of people who will say, oh, really? In the movie with people levitating things with their minds and laser swords, it wasn't logically consistent? As to say, it's a fantasy world, so of course things don't adhere to logic. But that's not always the case. In a fantasy world, take Lord of the Rings. Things do adhere to logic within the fantasy world. Magic in Lord of the Rings is set in stone. There is magic, and then there is stuff that's not magic. Magic doesn't just change. If Gandalf, at a snap of his fingers, could turn Sauron to dust, he would have done that. It's not like magic is ill-defined and anything can happen, and, and the fans are asking, well, why didn't he just do this? Why didn't he just do that? It's defined. We know what they can and can't do. We know what Jedi can and can't do. We've seen the journey of the Jedi already, with Anakin and with Luke. So we already know the limits, we know what it takes, and then this just flies in the face of all of it. It's inconsistent with the world logic of Star Wars. It's bad writing. So, what we have is this relationship between the writer and the work. It has to be a work surrounding a topic or idea which they're familiar with, and it has to be consistent with the world they have created, which is usually not that hard if, like it says here, they're staying drunk on the writing. If you're writing Star Wars and you love Star Wars and you've created a Star Wars mythos, then as you continue to write and flesh it out, your writing will naturally be consistent with the Star Wars universe because you actually care about it. If you don't care about it, then you don't care to break all the rules and make an inconsistent character. But, so, what we've uncovered so far with this all is good writing has to do with understanding your character, understanding your world, making believable characters, making believable worlds, and not being distracted by trying to fit in reality, for lack of a better phrase. And there might be amateur writers who say, yeah, I get that. I made this world, I've made it logically consistent, I've done this and that, but it's still bad. What's wrong with it? What have I done wrong? Why is it still bad? And that's just like that that secret sauce that these good writers have of just making things sound good. You know, whether it's the exact wordage that they use or what, but there's something there that it just works. And if you tried to replicate it, if you did almost the exact same thing but you did it, it would be bad. And I think that comes with that sort of genuine writing that you have to have for these in-depth, consistent worlds. It's got to be genuine, which is not always easy. And I think there's a good example of that here on my next slide, of sort of a genuine world that I think pretty perfectly encapsulates good writing and a not genuine world that encapsulates bad writing. So, here we go. On the left, we have the CW Batwoman show. This is season 2. And then on the right, we have Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Maybe my favorite comic of all time. One of the best of all time, for sure. Both Batman stories, both set in Gotham, I believe. I haven't watched much Batgirl, to be honest. But once considered a classic, once considered garbage. What's the difference? And if you haven't read Dark Knight Returns, definitely do. But when you look at that world, there's a few things that stand out immediately. Batman is not the 100% focal point of the book. Batman is a part of the book. Batman is just a piece. The story is really about Gotham. That's what it's about. It's about the changes that Gotham is going through, the city itself. Batman's a part of it, Commissioner Gordon's a part, the Joker's a part, Superman's a small part of it, the mutants are a part of it, but it's not really set on any one of their shoulders. And so, from that perspective, the city sort of has its own life. And I think very deliberately. And more so, we see how Frank Miller writes this world. He doesn't just say, oh, it's 6 p.m. Gotham on a Thursday and Batman's here to go kick some ass. But it'll be, it's 6 p.m. in Gotham. It's the summertime. It's hot. It's a heat wave going on. Everybody's uncomfortable. Here's the news. The news will be talking about something random, unrelated. Then maybe like a little story point, then it'll go on. We'll see little side characters that we never see again go through a little arc, whether it's that guy shooting up a movie theater or just some guy going about their day. We just get a little glimpse into the life of the city, just every little piece. And through this, we get this natural knowledge of the world in sort of this very well show don't tell kind of way, where we just see how this world moves and it all makes sense. Nothing is inconsistent. There's more mutants on the street. People are upset about it. It's hot. So, of course, I feel like when you're mad and things are going wrong, just having it be hot outside is just, that level of annoyance will just push you over the edge. But yeah, there's rioting, they want to get rid of Commissioner Gordon. There's step-by-step logic that all makes sense in the world and how Batman comes and plays a part in it. Versus Batwoman, where I feel like we don't really learn much about the city. We don't really learn much about the people and what they care about. We don't really learn much about what's really going on. As far as consistency, we have this character who just puts on a bat suit and can suddenly kick butt when, well, that's like the whole opposite of Batman's thing. he wears a suit because he can kick butt. He is Batman. Versus he puts on a suit and becomes Batman. It's just, it's two so different worlds that inhabit basically the same world, Gotham. And we have their Batwoman's just not fun. It's a lot of politics, and it's a lot of being a lesbian and coming out as Batwoman and coming out as whatever, versus fighting criminals and awesome Batman one-liners and Batman fighting Superman and Superman working for Ronald Reagan. And, you know, we see all this stuff where you're like, man, that was awesome. You don't get that on the other side. You don't get that level of fun and well-crafted world. So, that's kind of where we're left with what makes good writing. It's a lot of different things, and it's just a lot of the way how it's done, more so than what the things are. Because I've been saying, you know, good writing doesn't mean a good story necessarily. Because, again, you could say Tom King's stories are well written. They're written the way Tom King writes, and they're consistent with Tom King's viewpoint, and he's writing what he knows, but they're still bad. Then take, like, Buckaroo Banzai, which is, you know, I know it's like a cult classic. It's not a well-written movie by any means, but it is a lot of fun, and it's a classic for a reason. It's a fun world. It's a good movie, even if it's, like, got no world consistency. But again, like I'm saying here, consistent world logic and all that stuff is good when it's done right. Because you can do it and still have a boring story, and you can do it and still have a story not worth anything. How it's done, how it's executed, is what I think sets apart good writers and bad writers, and having that sort of understanding that not everybody has. Well, that was just me rambling on for half an hour about good writing. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.